Next one on is a person that I became very jealous of when I found out that he has cows for neighbors, which I find very interesting and awesome. And actually, his colleagues told me that they can see cows on Zoom calls, which is also very extremely awesome. Please welcome CMO of Paddle, Andrew Davies, who will show us new ways to grow.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Yep.
Thank you. You can see cows on my Zoom calls. You can also hear them, and that's the problem. I get complaints. Too much bird noise, too much mooing.
Still jealous.
Still jealous. OK, cool. Well, I'm jealous of your tattoos, so we can go mutual jealousy. Wonderful. I am keeping you from drinking, so we are going to go fast. Is that OK? Yeah. Fantastic. Not only am I keeping you from deep drinking, I'm enabling you to drink, because Paddle's paid for all of your free drinks after this. OK, is that OK? Cool. OK, fun. At least we start on a positive note before I dive in. Good. I've also got some swag here. People always ask us for T-shirts and hats and bags. So the questions at the end all get swag. Is that OK? Fantastic. Good. OK, good. Non-obvious ways to grow. It's easy to get a clap here in Croatia, isn't it? I haven't even started rolling out my Balkan languages yet. This is wonderful. OK, cool. My name's Andrew. It's a real privilege to be with you today. I love flying all over the world and meeting our customers. We've got quite a few customers here in Croatia and across the Balkan region, and meeting prospects, just anyone who's starting to build a SaaS business. That's my background. I was a SaaS founder. I failed a few times. I built one. We raised money. We exited in 2019, and that was a hell of a journey. We made every mistake under the sun. I felt most of the pain that you felt. Almost run out of money so many times, been taken to court, had key people leave, had customers churn. We can go on and on, maybe over a drink later, about the pain of being a SaaS founder. Anyone else experience that? Yeah, a few. Only a few are brave enough to wave their hands. OK, but it's not easy. But you've got to choose your hard, right? You've got to choose your hard in life. Like, working at McDonald's is hard. Being a SaaS founder is hard. Choose your hard. So today, we're going to dive in and try and give you a few key tips on how you can grow in 2024. But I'm going to really try and make sure they're non-obvious ways to grow. So I'm going to draw on a lot of Paddle's data. I'm going to draw on my experience as a SaaS founder. After I got acquired, I worked for the acquirer for a couple of years, buying businesses. And then I was a consultant working with about 20 different SaaS businesses, helping them grow. So I'm going to pool a bunch of that information. We're going to look at some non-obvious ways to grow in 2024. Right, so firstly, why are we here? Well, I know all of you are here because there's drinks in 40 minutes, and then there's going to be a lovely party, and Leo and the team have done a great job in getting that ready. I'm here. One of the things we have, a real privilege we have at Paddle, is we have a metrics product, which is free to use. You can plug any billing system into it, and we see 19,000 companies' financial data, 36 billion of ARR that we get to see. And we can see all kinds of different trends. So we're going to pull on some of that in terms of some of the recommendations we're going to give today. You can see here just a rough graph of MRR growth over the last few years. Lots of stuff happening. The Oxford English Dictionary added the word permacrisis, permanent crisis, permacrisis to its vocabulary last year. And it feels like that. We're all living in a slight bit of recoil shock, aren't we? And we're also here because we have 300 paddlers. That's what we call our team members. There's a few sitting on the front. Hopefully not going to be too rowdy. We've got 300 paddlers who wake up every single day trying to solve every one of these white words for our 3,500 paddle customers across the globe. So anything from, how do we help people do discounts better, to pricing, how do we help absolve you of tax compliance, how do we deal with churn? And so we wake up every day thinking about these issues because we want to do it for you so you don't have to. So we're going to jump into questions afterwards about any of this. All the hard questions will go to Glyn or to me over a beer. But with that to say, if we're going to talk about non-obvious ways to grow, what are the obvious ways to grow? I've thrown a few up on the board here, but really what I'm talking about is this playbook that's become so common in the European market. And honestly, I shed a little tear when I hear all of the how do we break the US presentations. It's important. Like, I betted my company on breaking into the US. We wasted a lot of money. We finally did it, and it was absolutely key to our final valuation and our exit. So I totally believe in it, right? But there is a global market to serve. And so just going to the US, just going up market, that's a pretty obvious way to grow. You can go and read Aaron Ross's Predictable Revenue. You get the book. You hire 10 SDRs. You hire 10 AEs. You go and spend the money on pipeline. But that obvious way to grow has got some cracks in it right now. And many of you are reading about that, the difficulty of outbound, that predictable motion is not so predictable. So we're not going to talk about any of these, particularly not going to talk about ChatGPT. I hold myself accountable on that one. But we are going to dig into 3 ways that are non-obvious because they're too big and scary to start thinking about, and 3 ways that are non-obvious because they're too detailed, they're too problematic, too niche to dive into. But all of these 6, 3 big and 3 small, are non-obvious ways to grow that we see data-backed evidence of driving outlying growth in 2024. Right. Is that okay? We'll dive right in. Good. Few nods. Fantastic. Firstly, non-obvious because they're too big and scary. And this is where I get to be a CMO and wave my hands around, and we talk about things like target market and narrative, because there's a whole bunch in your business before you ever get to your growth motions, your go-to-market fit, before you talk about tactics and channels that you've got to get right. The most obvious one is, do you have a tightly defined and understood target market? I've heard that said 10 times today, so it's not new news to everyone, and yet every single person in this room, we should be, and I feel this right now as I'm speaking, we should be receiving a personal challenge to try and tighten our target market. Having looked inside the engines of now probably 100 or 200 different SaaS businesses that they've been growing, everybody thinks that they are focused, but when you dive into the detail, do you really understand that target market? Do you really understand that ICP? The business that we built, it was a content personalization engine that I founded and we sold. We had 23 different data points that you had to successfully tick before we'd allow you to be on our target market, but allow you to be in our ICP. And we held ourselves to account that every quarter we'd tighten the definition to have less companies in our target market. It feels really counterintuitive, but I'd much rather have a difficult conversation with my board and with my investors that we don't really know what the $1 billion, $2 billion, $10 billion market is, but we know intimately the 1,000 companies that we want to go and sell to over the next cycle, rather than the other way around, that we've got this grand big plan and a PowerPoint that says Gartner says we've got a $2 billion market to go after, and yet we don't know any of those companies in real detail. So number one, we've got to go and create that defined target market. It's got to be big enough to matter, it's got to be small enough to win, and small enough to deeply understand. When we come to talk about ideal customers, I love to turn it back into what is the list of people that you've got to make friends with. If there are 1,000 customers in your target market, and there are 5 decision makers in each of them, then there's 5,000 friends you've got to make. And you need to know the names, you need to know the contact details of every one of them, and you've got to have a right to speak to them. It's as simple as that. Hopefully it's not 5,000. Hopefully for many of you it's 500 or 50 to start with. In his book, Jeffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, he defines this initial beachhead, this first target market, as a market that you genuinely can go and win more than 50% of over the next 18 months. And if we all go back and look at our target account lists and the ICP definitions we've built, I guarantee most of us will be much, much larger than that. Try and just do that as a thought exercise when you go home. How can we make this market so small, use extra criteria, philosophies, characteristics, ambitions, as well as the firmographic data, to make this market so small that we could genuinely go and win more than 50% of it over the next 12, 18 months. I love this quote from the old advertising executive, Ogilvy. Don't count the people you reach, reach the people who count. And that's really what it all comes down to when we're looking at this defined target customer list, this ICP definition. Cool. Number one, big scary problem you've got to deal with the focus of your business and make that a really defined target market. Number two, when I looked into, and this was pre-joining Paddle, although it was very much an issue when I joined Paddle, the demand engines of 20 or 30 SaaS businesses as an advisor, the least optimized piece of their demand generation, their sales efforts, was their narrative, their messaging, their content. They wanted to talk at all times about whether we should be paying on LinkedIn and whether we should be doing this new target audience and whether we should use retargeting and whether events are the best things to do or field dinners are the best thing to do. But what you say to that audience through that channel or tactic often is much more important than whether you're innovating on the very latest tactics. In fact, I think if you've got a defined target market and you're saying the right thing, everything should work. I don't care if you're buying a steak dinner for a prospective customer or you're retargeting them on Facebook. It should work if they're the right person and you've got the right message. So let's just spend 1 minute and think about what a narrative is. Because I'm a CMO, right? I used to be a founder. I've now fallen accidentally into marketing. And now I'm standing on a stage in Zagreb, waving my hands and talking about narrative. It feels super fluffy, right? But Ben Horowitz, who, investor in Silicon Valley, talks a lot about how the company's story is the company's strategy. Many of us here, particularly in go-to-market, we want to be data-driven. But we've got to be thesis-driven before we're data-driven. We've got to understand why customers care about us before we start measuring things. And so these are just 4 of the many questions you've got to answer in your business before you start getting to how many people are clicking, how many people are opening, how many people are entering our pipeline. Do you genuinely know what value you provide? Do you genuinely know why they should care? Do you genuinely know how they decide? This is a really important one. Put yourself in your customer's shoes. Do you know how they decide on a product or service like yours? Do you know how they make that decision? Who's involved in it? Who they refer to? Who they get influenced by? What, rational and emotional needs are playing into that decision? Who influences them? And we start to build up what we call a message house. We start thinking about what is this narrative? And there's lots of good frameworks for this. And I don't really care what framework you use. Andy Raskin has got a great one around sales methodology. And I can send you a bunch of links if you connect with me afterwards on sales narrative and company narrative. This is just one example. So what we've got here is Paddle, and this is our overall narrative as a business. So the insight behind Paddle is that software founders, people like yourself and myself, we want to go and build a business, build a product that has customers. We want to focus on those 2 things almost exclusively. The product we're selling and the customer we're selling it to. And yet, there are all these invisible barriers that get in the way of our growth. We never wanted to wake up and solve hiring or solving tax compliance or solving how we run a checkout in different currencies around the world or any of those issues, right? But they are barriers that get in the way of SaaS growth that we want to go and solve. So the strategic insight behind Paddle is there are these invisible barriers to scale that when you start a SaaS business, you have no knowledge about, but they come and hit you in the face, a tax fine letter or poor conversion into certain regions if you don't go and solve them up front. Our vision is to operate and grow digital product companies. We've got a whole bunch of key messaging pillars. We serve product-led companies who are scaling globally because the world is flat, everyone's born global. We're the best merchant of record for SaaS because we've completely rebuilt our platform in 2023. We're innovating way faster than any of the other people out on the market. We've also got more volume than them, and we know we're going to separate from them more and more in the future. And if you're comparing us to a normal PSP like a Stripe, we know we can drive significant increase in conversion rate better than them because of better payment acceptance across all of your local markets that you're selling into, and a whole bunch of other reasons. So we've got a key bit of strategic insight, a company vision, and we've got some key messaging pillars that all come back down to product value propositions that we sell. Now, this is really simple. You could probably do this in half an hour at your company. But building something like this now starts to mean that every one of your employees, every bit of your content can now punch much harder. Because you get into conversations, you know the North Star, you know why you should matter to your target customer. You know how that ladders down to your product value proposition. So narrative is really, really important. And then you bake it out and start thinking about content from the buyer's lens, the general questions they ask about their role, the specific questions about the problems you solve, the specific questions about the product and solution that you're serving, and then once you've actually sold into them, care how they should best use the product that you've just sold them. So once you've got this understanding of a narrative, you've got a message that matters and resonates with that target customer, then you can go and start building out all of this content, not just in your product-led environment, but also enabling your sales team to have these conversations that are quality in every one of those interactions. Cool. So we've talked about number 1, tight ICP, tight target market definition. Number 2, do you have a narrative? Do you have actually a story that makes sense and resonates with your target market? Does it even matter? And then 3rd big scary thing to think about is, are you even optimizing for the right thing at the right time? I meet so many, and I was in exactly the same situation, I meet so many kind of pre-1 million ARR software founders who think they're so desperate for revenue. But they're so early that actually repeatable insight is probably more important for their business than revenue is. In their place, I'd trade 10 times that bit of revenue for understanding the repeatable bit of insight that means I could go and sell to 1,000 more people like that. My story was that our first ever enterprise deal at the content personalization business we built, it was a $100,000 deal with Diageo. They own Guinness, the Irish beer. And then we sold another one of these to Unilever. So we just suddenly built $200,000 in revenue from 2 deals, and we thought we'd made it. Revenue was fantastic. We raised some money on it, and then next year, both of them churned. We realized it was an innovation budget. We'd completely missed the mark, and we had no knowledge of our real target customer. We'd completely missed insight, even though we'd got some revenue. So you've got to optimize for the right thing. And so we read all of these playbooks online, and they talk about scale and getting repeatability and efficiency that's measured by revenue growth from process improvements and reduce friction. You have this fine-tuned engine, and yet, at the very beginning, you should be optimizing for learning. Do you really understand why people buy? Do you really understand who influences them? And I know it's so hard because there's many in this room who are bootstrapped, or maybe your runway is shorter than you'd like it to be if you've had some venture funding or seed funding. And yet, learning is more important, I promise you, in these very early days than just a little bit more revenue. You've got to survive long enough to succeed, but you've got to think about, are we going to get to product market fit? Are we going to measure this by an increased confidence in us, in our team, in our customer interactions? And are we going to get that to an ICP that's tightly defined? Right. Hopefully, that wasn't too arm-wavy, and there are 3 big, non-obvious, scary things that you should be thinking about. Now let's go really detailed and talk about 3 specific types of tactic that are now also not obvious because they're very detailed and complicated. Is that okay? Cool. Everyone's thinking about the beer that's outside. I'm going to keep going. Fantastic. I couldn't be on this stage talking about growth unless we also talked about monetization. How many people in this room have got salespeople selling? Cool. Or even like a pricing page that's selling for you, most people. How many people in this room have got support or success teams? Yeah, cool. So yeah, hopefully that's pretty much 100% coverage across both. We're selling, we're putting resource into selling, we're putting resource into retaining and expanding. How many of you know exactly the person and process to define pricing? 1, 2, 3, cool. I'm loving this. There's a few here, but not too many, right? It's a complicated process. And yet, when we look at incremental investments in user acquisition, monetization, or retention, it's the user monetization that, as you scale, compounds to drive outsized growth. So let's stop for a moment to think about this. And it's not obvious, not because people don't talk about it. People do talk about it. There was a great presentation over there from Value Ships talking about pricing and packaging. People do talk about it. But do we go and do anything with it? Let's dive in. Let's start off with 2 key principles for you to take away. Firstly, do you really understand your value metric? Your value metric is your currency, your unit of exchange. Are you charging by seats or kilobytes? Are you charging by unit of revenue or number of integrations? And that value metric is really important because when you start charging based on a value metric rather than a feature, our data, and we've done more pricing studies in SaaS than anyone else on the market, shows that you outperform over multiple years. A good value metric has to be aligned with growth, okay? If the company that you're serving grows, they should pay more. It should be aligned with value. If the value they received goes up, they should pay more. And then it should be simple to understand. All of that sounds really obvious and head-noddy, but if you ping me afterwards, I'll show you countless examples where companies have not ticked those 3 boxes. And you haven't actually found a value metric that scales with customer growth, with the value they receive, and stays simple. And often it's a combination of value metrics. In the market right now, we're seeing more people have seat-based plus usage-based. So that you can actually combine multiple value metrics to drive growth. Right, that's a good value metric. The most important thing here is, though, you've just got to build the muscle. What this data says is that over the course of multiple years, if you are making a pricing change every quarter, your average revenue per user or average revenue per account will have grown by 103% more than those who have made no pricing changes. This is not even a good pricing or packaging change, not even a successful one. It's just doing it. Everyone in this room understands the process of testing and learning, and yet we often don't do it in our pricing and packaging. So build that muscle. Book a pricing committee call with the right people once every quarter. Just make a call to start testing something with your new users and learn, because over time this compounds and your average revenue per user, average revenue per account goes up as you learn. Right, let's take a different tack on this for 1 more minute. The market's got really high expectations. Like all of our studies are showing right now in 2024, you should not be doing blunt price increases without a lot of research. Willingness to pay in most markets for most feature sets is going down. There's huge competition across the market. Now, I still believe that most early stage SaaS is underpriced, so this is not an argument about that, but you've got to understand that the market has got pretty high expectations because of the volume of competition. But so these blunt price increases can't be the key growth lever, but there are some ways of separating out your broad value drivers from your niche value drivers. So let me stop on that for a minute. What we've got here is, this is a study that we do very regularly with hundreds of SaaS businesses. On the vertical axis is the higher willingness to pay, and on the horizontal axis is how preferred is it? How many of your target customers prefer that thing, that feature? And what you can see is you will always find a few things that are broad value drivers. They're the core features of your product that everybody is willing to pay for. They should be in your core plan, probably with some thresholds to force people to upgrade. But over here, there's some really interesting things, some niche value drivers. These are things that perhaps only 20 or 30% of your customer base actually are willing to pay for. And they're perfect to drag out of your plan and put as an add-on. Because now you're discriminating on price for those who are willing to pay, and you're not raising price for everyone else who isn't. Classic examples for this might be single sign-on or enterprise-grade onboarding. All these kind of things that not everyone wants, but the people who do want them really want them. I remember learning this lesson myself for the first time. We were selling into a big asset manager, a big institutional bank in New York, and we couldn't get the deal over the line. Procurement just kept not getting back to us or blocking it. And then we suddenly realized that they just didn't believe we'd implement it. They bought so much software that was on the shelf. And so we just added $20,000 of implementation support, and they signed it the next day. They had a high willingness to pay for something that no one else wanted to pay for, and it made the deal go through immediately. And so you have to think about what are those things that are going to move the needle for those type of customers. Right. Next, we talked about little about this on the other stage. In a world of permacrisis, we've got to think about how we grow in multiple markets through real localization, true localization. The strongest companies that we're supporting are those who are taking this born global approach. They come from South Korea, or Zagreb, or Cluj, or Budapest, or Tel Aviv. They're not based in New York or San Francisco, but from day one, they've started selling around the world. And this is really exciting to me. I work from a countryside house in the middle of Devon. It's not a SaaS hub. It's not where big SaaS companies should be built. But I love the fact that from my room there, I can sell, and I can market, and I communicate to people all over the world. So we've got to start thinking about how we make sure we're resilient in this macroeconomic time by selling everywhere. I showed this slide on the other stage earlier. It's just a very quick look at the aggregate growth rates of all the different markets. And it's basically saying, don't just focus on America. Of course, in absolute terms, the US is huge, but there are growth markets all over the world. Think about how you can sell into those. There are huge millions of people, billions of people coming online and buying with credit cards or Alipay or PayPal. Think about how you can serve that market that is underserved versus just going and trying to sell B2B SaaS into the Fortune 5000 in America. But true localization is not just about making sure you're able to sell in different countries. It's also thinking about what you should charge. What we see constantly when we do willingness to pay studies is you're leaving money on the table if you're charging $9.99 in every single country, because in Southeast Asia, they're much less willing to pay on average, and the Nordics are much more willing to pay. And so you should be thinking about how you can price discriminate based on the region that someone's in order to maximize the revenue that you're driving. Again, you can do these studies in an expensive way, and we have a whole consultancy that can deliver that, or you can just use something like the Big Mac Index. How much is the Big Mac in a local economy? And use that as a proxy, particularly if you're a consumer SaaS. And yet, all of our research, and this is done with Kyle Poyer over at OpenView, 50% of SaaS operators right now are not localizing their prices. Not based on anything, or willingness to pay, or foreign exchange rates, or operating costs, or all of those nasty local tax rates that Paddle takes care of for you, but none of those nasty tax rates that are happening all over the world. Localization really matters. This is one of those really niche growth levers, right? You don't want to go and think about it in a board meeting, but you've got to think about it at some point. We see that localized payment methods, if you offer more than one payment method, then it correlates with a growth rate of 21% faster. If you actually offer more than one currency, 12% faster, 25 currencies, 25% faster. If you localize your pricing in each region, it correlates with a 30% faster growth. These are meaningful numbers. You've got to eke them out over time, and you've got to do some work to get this to happen. But these are meaningful numbers, and it all makes sense, right? If I'm not used to buying through my credit card, I want to know that there's a PayPal option. If I'm not used to seeing a dollar currency, I want to see my local euro currency, or thanks to Brexit over in the UK, the sterling. I apologize for everyone here. So localization really, really matters. Right, let me land finally with this. Net revenue retention, NRR. Is everyone measuring their NRR in some way? How much revenue retained from that cohort? Fantastic. There's a few CFOs in the room and wannabe CFOs. I love it. Awesome. This really, really matters. So here's a few things, and I'll end on one magic way to improve your NRR. There we go. Annual plans. The strategy we see work time and time again, particularly with lower price point SaaS, is asking people to upgrade to annual plans after they've experienced the first couple of value points from your product. Yes, you can ask for it up front, but this is an example of one of our customers, Whoop. And what we've done here is gone through the data and shown how it works. And after they've been working with Whoop, Whoop is this band that you can wear that gives you lots of data on your physique, et cetera, your fitness. After you've used it for a certain time and logged in a certain amount of times, then we'll send this offer and we see a significant upgrade to that annual plan to get the discount. And annual plans, they correlate really well with increasing lifetime value, number one. Number two, think about your retention. Think about your involuntary churn as well as your voluntary churn. So involuntary churn, we have a product for that. It's around smart dunning and retries and making sure that if credit cards expire that you're going to catch up with that. But also voluntary churn. Our data shows that on the point of cancellation, you've got 18 seconds to add a slight bit of friction into that person's life to understand why they're churning. 18 seconds before they get really pissed off. Okay? So when they hit, I want to cancel, what are you going to do? So we often advise cancellation flows like this. Why are you canceling? Sorry to see you go. Give us some feedback. Did you like anything about this product? Then after that, what we'll do is present them, would you like to pause for a few months? Would you like to downgrade your plan? Or some other options that aren't a full cancellation, but are just allowing them to stay as a customer, but at a lower basket size. So think about that from your churn perspective. And then think lots about expansion revenue. There's been a bit said about this on different stages over the last day, so I won't labor the point. But the data from Benchmark over in the US, which was last quarter's data, shows even under 5 million ARR, the best businesses are driving 20% of their overall ARR growth from expansion revenue. Building expansion into the pricing and packaging of those products, making sure you acquire companies cheaply as part of your acquisition strategy, but there's a clear pathway for them to upsell themselves, to use more of your product, to share it with more users, to get more value from it, and therefore pay more. A company like Paddle, our main product billing is a take rate business, right? We charge a percentage of the transaction because of all the payments and currencies and compliance and fraud that we take away from you. And so we have a really interesting NRR model because once companies come in and join us, then if we do our job right and they do our job right, they do their job right, they just keep on growing. It is a fantastic business to be in because as long as we align ourselves with the success of our customers, we both win over time. Think about value metrics, think about add-ons, think about going multi-product over time so you can grow that basket size. And then, before we finish, one cheeky way to increase your NRR by 5% today. No one believes me, do they? No one believes me. Okay, cool. So maybe this room is 50 times smarter than every other room I'm in, and I believe it, right? I've had some great conversations today. But if we went and looked at the contracts that every one of you are issuing to your customers, I bet that the vast majority of you wouldn't have a renewal increase based on inflation. You wouldn't be charging an extra 5% on the renewal based on an RPI, based on the fact that costs are going up across the world. I wish I'd gone and checked a few of your software before this, because I know this is not true in many of your situations. And yet, if you just put a one-liner in your contract that on the point of renewal, the price is going to go up by 5% based on inflation in the global economy, instantly you've added 5 points of NRR into your business. One of those really underlooked, non-obvious ways to drive growth. Usually never gets discussed in a contract negotiation, but instantly adds NRR to your book. Cool. I don't want to say too much more, because there's drinks outside, as I might have mentioned once or twice. It's a real pleasure to be with you. We've got a bunch of the paddle team here. We want to be as helpful as possible over the next few days. I've got the whole morning free tomorrow for anyone who wants to talk about growth and tactics and channels and payments and localization and all that fun stuff. We can do any questions now here. We've got a bit of swag down the bottom for any people who do ask questions, and otherwise, we've got some drinks outside, and we hope you have a fantastic evening. So thank you so much.
So, we have questions down there.
One at the back.
You're going to throw the swag at him?
You can throw the swag.
I'm not good at it.
You've got liability insurance, right?
Thank you, and thank you for the great presentation. I was wondering if you can tell me what were the key metrics you used when defining your target market? Like, is it just revenue, or is it tailored to your product, or do you develop and, I don't know, increase your product based on that target market, or is it other way around? So,
yeah, I love the question. So I do believe that as you discover more about your target market, that should inform your product development cycle. That's a really smart way of framing that question. Those two things should be interactive. It's not just about one, not the other. But let's talk through a few examples. I can talk through the paddle example if it's interesting, and Glyn can talk at great depth about this because he's been very involved in that process. The perfect customer for paddle is going to be a product-led software business that's probably outside of the major domestic economies, therefore has to scale internationally earlier, and we normally use its internationalization ambition. We use a proxy for that, which would be site traffic. So if you've got site traffic of more than, say, 30% of your site traffic is from outside of your core region, we know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we can help. There's a bunch of other things too, but revenue range, you being a software company, you having a checkout, and you having some international traffic is the key things that paddle look for. So that's what works for us. But there are other things that become really interesting. If you are a Sequoia-backed SaaS business and you've raised $50 million in seed money, you probably won't use paddle because you can hire all the lawyers and accountants that you want, and you don't really care about sales tax fines, and you don't really care 2 bits on your conversion rate through, and you can just go for it. Whereas if you're bootstrapped, or you've got a low number of employees, or you've got to grow revenue per employee, then that becomes really interesting to us. Or if you're a technical founder who sees everything, growth and monetization, through the lens of the product, then we know that's going to be highly correlated with a paddle customer. So those are some of the things we look at. And I explain a few of those just so that you can understand that it's not all about firmographic size of company. There's a bunch of other interesting information that comes in there that might be philosophy. It might be what are they saying in their market reports that we know aligns with what we're doing. It might be, are they hiring fast? And I believe every company here has to build your own fingerprint, your own set, your DNA, your description of that target market, and challenge yourselves to think broadly beyond just size of company and where you're located. And that's where the real gold is. Cool. Couple in the middle here.
Hi. So you mentioned, wow, my voice is so loud. You mentioned the pricing and packaging and how it's beneficial to change your price often. Yep. Can you share how often do you do it in paddle, and maybe some good and bad examples of how it should and shouldn't be done?
Yeah, totally.
From your learnings?
Totally. So one of the reasons I joined Paddle was that our pricing and packaging is so simple, and it's aligned with growth. So we haven't changed ours because it's fully usage-based. It's 5% and 50 cents. It's on there, and if you're big, it's more money. If you're small, it's less money because it's a percentage, right? What we are innovating with a lot is our other divisions where it's a more SaaS-based pricing. So we have a pricing consultancy that we're changing SKUs all the time, breaking them down, building them up, working out what the willingness to pay would be for those. And then we've got a retention product that's on a kind of priced per performance basis. If we save you churn, then you pay money, and if we don't, you don't. So Paddle, because we're a fintech, is actually a pretty unique example of this, where it's correlated with growth, and therefore we haven't innovated much in it. We probably should, but we haven't, because it's fully usage-based. The companies we've been working with a lot, and my previous businesses, there's a few things that we should note here. Firstly, we're talking about pricing and packaging changes every quarter, not just pricing changes. So it doesn't mean just change the main price. And so then you've got to think about, if it's pricing changes, is it new customers or is it renewal customers? Is it a certain segment of customers we want to charge in a different way? Is there a new feature set we want to split out as an add-on? Is there something new we want to bring to market and we're going to try charging for it instead of just bundling it into the similar price? So there's a bunch of ways to think about pricing. And then with packaging, we talked about add-ons. We could think about lots of other ways to do this. One of the best examples I came across recently, they weren't a paddle customer, and they listened to this advice about having a pricing committee, and they held a once-a-day meeting with their executive team on pricing and packaging, because they knew this was a lever that was undiscussed in the business. And so they said, we're going to give it so much time and effort. Every day they met for 1 hour to go through all of the data, understand what was happening. And they were a scaled business. They were probably 50 million ARR already, right? So they had data to work with. And once they'd done that for 2 weeks, they then went down to 1 meeting a week, and then eventually went down to 1 meeting a month. But I saw their data recently, and it was transformational how the changes that they'd implemented had managed to lever up their growth rates by totally changing packaging and the packaging for a persona and the price point for each of those different markets they were serving. It was fascinating. So I don't believe there's any right way to do this in aggregate. You've got to do what's true for you, but what I do believe is at least hold that conversation. I think that should be true for everyone. Book that conversation once a quarter to at least talk about what could be changed. And then, from there on, then, you've got to cuddle with the chaos.
Thank you.
Cool.
Hi, I have a question regarding internationalization and offering the prices differently there. So in case of B2B, sorry, we tried it, and actually I got more angry customers who checked multiple different countries than I got any increases there. So, I know that it's very beneficial tactic for B2C, but does it work for B2B in your case, or it was just something that we did wrong?
That's so interesting, because we see the opposite. We often see it's easier in B2B when you're in a sales environment than it is in B2C, where someone just uses a VPN and looks at the price point for a whole bunch of other... We serve a bunch of gaming businesses, and it's super hard. These are kids who want to make sure they spend $4 instead of $5, and so they're in a market that they know is expensive, they'll use a VPN and pretend they're in India and buy the thing for cheaper. So we actually see the opposite, but again, you've got to work it out in your local market, and this is just something you've got to test, and there's not going to be any one broad rule. Guys, there's too many questions. There's beer next door. What's going on? This is tough. Cool.
Hi. You spoke earlier about niching down and tightening the market.
Yes.
So in that process, how do you know that you're on the right track?
Yep.
How do you know that the strategy works for you, or you should maybe back down and reconsider?
Yep. Can I tell a story quickly for 2 minutes on this? Because it's something that's it's meaningful to me, because I've been through the hard yards of it. Firstly, in answer to your question, I think when I spoke about confidence as one of the leading indicators, if you've got a good exec team, you can speak honestly to each other, you've got some good customer relationships you can question, you should have all of those conversations and see if you're confident about what you're doing. I don't believe you should overestimate the intuition that comes from gathering that qual as well as quant data. But we were probably 3 million ARR, we were probably 40 people, and we counted up the markets we were serving, the KPI we were driving for a certain vertical in a certain channel. This was personalization that could be on web or email or app or similar. And we realized we were serving 15 different markets. We realized that's why it was so hard. Because our hiring, our marketing, our messaging, our targeting, our sales conversations were all sharded. Our product development, we had feature requests coming from 15 different use cases. And so we took ourselves into an offsite as a leadership team. And it was probably one of the hardest meetings I've been in, because we said, we're going to hold these 15 up on a board, and we're not going to leave until we've chosen one. And we categorized every one of them based on how big is the market, how willing are they to pay, how strong is our product market fit, and a whole bunch of other things there. And we made a really risky bet, because we betted the house, betted the entire company on the market that had the highest willingness to pay. We thought, okay, there's this financial services market that we've got a really strong product market fit with, but it's just not big enough to build a proper sized company on. And if we're going to exit, we have to at least show a pathway to a proper sized company. And so we deleted 14 of those 15. We deleted 2/3 of our marketing database. We had people leave our team, including our senior team, who were hired in to look after verticals we no longer liked, no longer looked for. And we betted the house on what we defined as enterprise B2B tech in the US. And following that, we went and closed not just Pega Systems, that was our only one customer in that market at that point. We then went and closed Salesforce and IBM and Cisco and Intel and SAP and then exited the business 18 months later. And I fully, wholeheartedly believe that came out of going into a room, looking at all the data we had, choosing what was the most important thing to optimize the company for. Like, if we were going to build the company in a different way, we might have chosen something different. But we chose to optimize based on the willingness to pay and the size of market in enterprise tech, bedded the house on that, made a bunch of quick decisions, and saw that unfold. And so, you can do this in multiple ways, but that type of decision-making, I find, once you've got different categories you're working with, becomes really important. Cool.
Hi. So you talked about closing 2 customers and achieving 200K ARR, and that you lost them and churned them, and that you kind of regret it. And if you had the knowledge that you have now, how would you handle that situation?
I love that question. That's a great question. I was thinking about it earlier. There's a few things. There's 2 ways to go here, right? Either we should have closed those businesses but not believed the lie that they were our target market, or we shouldn't have closed those businesses. But I think, hand on heart, we needed some revenue. We should have closed the business, but we shouldn't have imagined that there were another 100 businesses out there willing to go and close just like they were. So there were a few ways I would have gone and done that. Firstly, I'd have gone and spoken to a bunch of other people who looked just like them and found out if they closed as well. That would be one thing that's really important. And number 2, I wouldn't have betted our entire product roadmap on that one ICP until we had a few more data points. So I think that's an awesome question. And it's so easy to look back and say this is what we should have done. Hindsight is 20/20, right? But I think that's what we should have done, because we probably lost maybe $500,000 of wasted capital and probably 2 years on imagining that the ICP was what we were going to build the company on, and then didn't. Cool. I think we're done. It's been such a pleasure. Hope you have a fantastic evening. Enjoy your dinners, enjoy your drinks. Come and grab time with myself or any of the paddle team. We'd love to chat. We really want to help SaaS companies across Zagreb, across Croatia, across the Balkans grow better, faster, safer. So any way we can do that, we will. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Just a few short information if we didn't remember, but Paddle Happy Hour is happening outside right now. And don't forget about the party, 8 o'clock, Club Katran. If you need extra info, find me or anyone from the crew and we'll let you know. So Club Katran, 8 o'clock, it's a productive party. So I hope I'll see you all there.